The first thing Mateo Álvarez noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over open land at dusk, but the heavy, aching silence that clung to the dusty road outside his ranch, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Mateo had lived alone for years, long enough to recognize when something felt out of place. That morning, as he drove his old pickup toward the nearest town to buy supplies, he saw her standing near the roadside market, small, thin, and unmoving. Like someone who had been forgotten by time. She wore a faded black coat that hung loosely on her shoulders, far too large for her fragile frame. Her hair was neatly tied back, though streaks of gray betrayed years of hardship beyond her apparent age. In her trembling hands, she held a small cloth pouch, clutching it to her chest as if it were the last piece of her heart. Mateo would have driven past, like he had passed countless strangers before, but something in her eyes stopped him. They were dark, tired, and filled with a quiet dignity that refused to beg, even as hunger hollowed her cheeks. Mateo pulled over without fully understanding why. It was a lone rancher in northern Mexico, a man shaped by loss and long days under an unforgiving sun. His wife had died years earlier, leaving behind a house full of echoes and a heart that had learned to survive by closing itself off. It believed kindness was a luxury for those who could afford disappointment, and disappointment had been his most faithful companion. Yet as he stepped out of his truck and met the woman's gaze, something old and human stirred within him. She spoke softly, her Spanish careful and accented, as if each word cost her strength. "Señor. I have not eaten in 3 days," she said, lowering her eyes in shame rather than desperation. Slowly, she opened the pouch and revealed a simple gold ring, worn thin with time. "Will you buy my wedding ring?" The words hit Mateo harder than any accusation ever could. He looked at the ring, then at her hands, hands that had once cooked meals, wiped tears, and held someone she loved. He knew what a wedding ring meant. His own still lay hidden in a drawer at home, untouched since the day he buried his wife. It wasn't a jewelry, it was memory, promise, and pain all bound together. Selling it was not just a transaction, it was surrender. Her name was Lin May, she explained quietly. She had come to Mexico years ago with her husband, chasing the promise of work and a better future. They had found a job on a construction site, and for a while, life had been modest but hopeful. Then came the accident. A fall. A moment. A widow left in a foreign land with no family, no safety net, and no language strong enough to protect her. When the savings ran out, hunger moved in. Mateo felt his throat tighten. He had expected a scam, a trick, something he could dismiss. Instead, he found himself standing before a woman who had already given everything and was now being asked to give the last symbol of her love just to survive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some money, extending it toward her. "You don't need to sell this," he said gruffly. "Take the money." Lin May shook her head gently, pressing the ring back into the pouch. "No. This ring fed me once. It must feed me again," she replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. That was what broke him. Not the hunger, not the poverty, but the calm courage of someone who refused to take charity without dignity. Mateo bought the ring. It paid more than it was worth, far more, but Lin May tried to refuse even then. Only when he insisted did she accept, bowing her head slightly in gratitude. He expected that to be the end of it. A brief encounter, a good deed to ease his conscience before returning to his lonely routines. But as he turned to leave, he hesitated. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. She shook her head. "Then come with me," he said, surprising himself as much as her. At least for a meal. They ate together at a small roadside stand, simple food, beans, tortillas, hot soup that warmed more than just the body. Mateo watched as color slowly returned to her face, as her hand steadied and her breathing eased. He realized then how close she had been to disappearing, not dramatically, but quietly, the way so many people do when the world looks away. After that day, Mateo couldn't forget her. The ring sat heavy in his pocket, not as an object, but as a reminder. He returned to the roadside the next morning and the next, until finally he found her again. This time, he didn't ask questions. He offered work. Small tasks at the ranch, cooking, tending the garden, things she could do with care if not strength. Lin Mei accepted, not with relief, but with gratitude that looked like resolve. Life at the ranch began to change in ways Mateo hadn't anticipated. The house that once echoed with emptiness slowly filled with warmth. Lin Mei cooked meals that carried the flavors of her homeland, blending them with local ingredients, creating something new and comforting. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were thoughtful, often profound. She treated every task as meaningful, every sunrise as a gift rather than a burden. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky burn orange and gold, Mateo found himself opening up in ways he hadn't since his wife's death. He spoke of loneliness, of guilt for surviving, of the fear of caring again. Lin Mei listened without interruption, her presence calm and grounding. When he finished, she said softly, "Pain does not disappear when we hide from love. It only waits." Weeks turned into months. Trust grew, slow and fragile, but real. Mateo noticed how Lin Mei still wore an empty space on her finger where the ring had once been. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he placed the ring he had bought back into her hands. "This belongs to you," he said. "I was only holding it." Lin Mei's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. "You bought it when I had nothing. It became yours," she whispered. "No," Mateo replied, his voice steady. "It reminded me of who I still am." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't the romance, not yet. It was recognition, the understanding that two broken lives could stand beside each other without trying to fix what was lost, only honoring what remained. Over time, affection grew naturally, like plants given water after a long drought. Laughter returned to the ranch. So did hope. The emotional climax came one morning when Mateo fell ill, collapsing from exhaustion and untreated pain he had ignored for years. Lin Mei cared for him tirelessly, refusing to leave his side. As he recovered, he realized with startling clarity that kindness was not weakness, and love was not something you ran out of, it multiplied when shared. Months later, at a small-town gathering, Mateo stood beside Lin Mei, holding her hand. She wore the ring again, not as a symbol of loss, but of survival. When someone asked how they met, Lin Mei smiled gently and said, "I was hungry," and he listened. Their story spread quietly, not as a legend, but as a reminder. A reminder that humanity lives in small choices. That compassion can change the course of two lives. That sometimes, the most valuable thing we give or receive is not money, but dignity. And for Mateo, every sunrise on the ranch now carried meaning. Not because the pain was gone, but because love had returned. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the simple, powerful act of seeing another human being and choosing not to walk away.